Then we learned about internal inline CSS. We learned about inline CSS. Then we learned about attributes. So what attributes are basically? They so what an attribute basically does, it describes or gives more detail about an HTML tag. Right? So if we are using anything with a tag, then we can call it as its attribute. So last time we saw it till here, we even learned about form, right? What form is and all the input types. Now we are moving to inline CSS, right? So let's create a right. So this is our HTML page. Now let's add something to it. So we are using an attribute here, bg color, which is basically for background color. So let's set the color to select a good color here. Let's set the option. This is the color. Now we can have another color for this one too. Yeah, so we learned about inline CSS, right? So we are styling this heading here. Let's increase the font size to, let's say, 100 px, and let's set font color as mm, secondly, about this paragraph, let's style it, just set its color as white. Yeah, so when we just refresh our browser, we can see that the color has changed. Yeah, so we have styled them. Now what if we want a font to be like a heading to have an underline? So let's write text decoration under. So there are many styling elements that we can learn. For example, another is font weight, which is bold. Yeah, but it's already bold, so it won't affect it that much. Use it in on our paragraph, so you can see that our paragraph is bold now, right? So this was a brief about inline CSS. Now we are going to learn here about internal CSS. We are going to learn about internal CSS. So what is an internal CSS? So here what we were doing is we were doing like we were adding style to each tag individually, right? But what if I wanted to have two headings, right? Heading two and such headings, 4, 5, and 6. Now, what if I refresh it? Then what do we see here? That only heading 1 has this style acquired, and all the other headings are not styled. So what we'll have to do, we have to just write these style code in all the headings. So this will be a really time consuming job, right? So to prevent this, what we can do is we can style all of them internally using the internal CSS. So how can we use the internal CSS? Yeah. So in the head tag, what we have to do is in the head tag, what we have to do is we have to use another tag, which is a style tag. So what we can do in this tag, text slash CSS. This is its syntax. Now what we can do in this tag, what we want here, that all the heading tags, what we want here, that all the heading tags should have a style, should have a common style, right? This is what we want. This one as well. Yeah. So this was yeah. So what I was saying, that we want all the heading tags to get styled at once. So what we are going to do is we are going to select the heading tag. So which heading tag do we want to use here? H1, right? So we have selected H1 here, and now what we are going to do is we are going to write a particular style in this block so that it will get applied to all the H1 tags here. So let's write it as, okay, so first let's see what's the output here. See, it's just plain and simple. Let's remove this line. Won't be that hard to understand. Add a center tag as well. We don't even want to add this to the body as well. So now when we just refresh our browser, we can see that we have this tag here. Now what we want all the heading tag to have a color. What color do we want here? Let's say red. So when we refresh our browser, what we can see that all the heading tags have gotten colored. Right? One style has been applied to all the heading tags. Similarly, if we want to increase their size, font size, let's say 50 px, we can have it as here, right? Let's reduce it to 40. Then another thing is, if you want to edit all the paragraph text, what we have to do here is just increase the font size to maybe 55 px. So what we can see here is, right, we can see that all the elements have been styled just once, and this style has been applied to all the elements with the similar tag, right? Now about the body tag, what we can do here is background color, let's black, paragraph I want visible, yes, color white. So let's refresh it again. Now, so we all can see that our tags have been, styled. It's just using the styles only once in this tag. So isn't it easier comparatively to the inline CSS? That's the reason why we can use internal CSS here. Right? So this was only much about internal CSS. Now we have other things in internal CSS. Let's discuss them. For example, like if we want a background to have a different type of linear, we are using linear gradient here. Let's okay. So what this does, linear gradient does is blue. You'll see the result. Can you see the result? At first, the color was blue, then it got converted to red at the end. So this is what a linear gradient does. The more color we can insert in it, the better it will look. White, red. Let's write it like that. And we can see another color popping here. Let's write pink, maybe. Right. So this is how a linear gradient works. So these are different styling things. You can search on Google or something like that, so that you can get more of the CSS properties and what you can use there. Right. So we have another thing here, which is apart from this, yeah, we have a div tag here. So it's basically a division tag. So what it does, it divides certain elements into certain forms, right? So how we can use it here, for example, we have this heading here, right? And this will work. we, let's use this heading. We are writing this portion of our heading and paragraph in a division tag, right? So when we'll just run it normally, it won't have much effect on it. Let's set the body's color to black. Okay. Now what we have done is we have added a div tag in this, and we have added a heading element and a paragraph element inside the div tag. Right. So what we can do here is we can specifically change this div tag, right? And it will act like a container. It will act like a container. So what if we just style it here? Okay, so let's use the external css only, internal css only, div. Now what we can do here is let's set background color as white. So when we just refresh it, okay, let's write it as blue. Now we can see that the heading and the paragraph that we had put inside the div tag has its own space, has its own container, and whatever CSS we have applied to it, we can see it here, right? So this is what the div tag does. It just divides the content from the normal content and has a CSS of its own. That's what we can do with it. Now let's use some more CSS here. Example, yeah. So another thing we have here is with div tag, we are trying to learn about margin as well. So what does margin does? So margin set. So this is what our page looks right now. But when we just refresh it, what we can see that our whole div tag just shifted 10 pixel, 100 pixels down, right? Because we have added a margin top to it. And what if we write margin bottom as well? Margin left, margin right. So what will happen to it? It will just have spaces from all the sides of the div tag, right? Similarly, we have another thing which is called as padding. So what padding does is, you'll see it, just write 50px. So what happened here is when we write padding, so the internal elements of a div tag, they have a margin of their own, or they have a padding of their own, which just separates them from the border of the div tag, right? You can see that there's a gap all these four sides. So we can use padding in different ways. For example, padding top, padding bottom, left, and padding right. Right now we'll see the same result. There will be no change in any result. But if we remove, for example, these three, you'll surely see a change here. We'll see a change here. Did we remove something else as well? Let's add these things. Okay, yeah. Let's here change it. Yeah. Right. So this is how margin and padding works as well. Now let's learn something more about some small CSS properties. Yeah. So we have another thing which is okay. Now what we want here is consider. Let's remove this div tag. We can have a div tag inside a div tag, right? For example, let me give you an example here. We have one div here. Okay, so before this, yeah. Now, what if what we have done here? We have set this color as red, the headings color as red, and its font size as 40 pixels, and this has been applied to all the headings. But no, but I want that this particular heading should have another this particular heading should have another style. So what we can do is either we can add a inline css to it, but we don't want that. We want something else. So there's a we have another attribute in html and css, which is a class attribute and a, an id attribute. So what basically a class and id does, it just specifies a class or an tag so that we can select the tag with the class name, so that it will have a unique name so that we can use it and apply css to it. So let's write class here. Let's give it as a class as right. Now what we can do here is, now whenever we need to use class, we need a dot operator here, right, or a full stop here to use the class, and we have to use it with the class name, right? So now let's style the heading here. So what we can do here is, let's set the color of the font to blue. Now what we can see here is, when we refresh it, we can see that this particular heading, the color of this particular heading has been changed to blue using the class. And what if we add this to, if we set the class of heading 5 as well to head, right, then what we can see that even heading 5 as well has a different css now, right? So this is what we can use class for. Similarly, we have id here, right? id is used for the same method as well. Let's set id attribute for heading 1. Let's set its id to th, right? Let's set id of heading 2 as well. Now in order to use an id selector, right, what we have to do is we have to use a hash, right, with the id name. Now what we can do here is we can set its color to, say, yellow. Now when we just refresh it, we can see that the first two headings are yellow, the third and fifth heading is blue, and the fourth heading is red. So by default, all the headings are supposed to be red, but we have specified that we want these two headings to be of blue color and these two headings of yellow color. Right. So this way we can use a class and IDs to just have a different type of CSS in every element. Right. So this was about heading and ID in class. Now the third type of CSS that we are going to use. Okay, so another thing before that. Yeah, similarly, I was talking about a div tag. Let's have a div here. Let's close it, and we can have another div tag inside. Right now, currently, when we just refresh it, won't affect any of the content here. But now let's give this a class. Let's write it as div1. Right. Let's give this a class as div2. Right. So now what we are going to do here is dot div1. Let's add some CSS to this div tag. Let's set its height as 200 px and width. Okay, apart from this px, we can even use percentage. Right, we can even use percentage, 100%. Right. So now when we refresh it, okay, we cannot see it properly. So let's add a color to it. Background color white. So when we'll refresh it, we can see a division here, right? The div tag we have used, and if we don't want width to be 100%, let's write it as 200 pixels. When we refresh it, we can see that we have a square here, right? Now, since we have written another div inside the first div, we can use it as well. And what we are going to do is let's set the background color of the internal div as black. Let's set it as black. But when we refresh it, nothing is going to happen because it has no height and width. Set its height to 100 pixels. Let's width to 100 pixels. So this is how it is looking right now. Right. So let's arrange it. Now what we can do is we can add some margin top. Let's say 10 pixels. Will it work? Okay, I guess we are supposed to use padding here. Padding from all the side will get okay. So it's one div inside another div, right? So we just have to align all the div in the center. We have to align the div in the center, and for that we can use some properties like okay, I cannot just properly remember the property. Okay, we'll see that in a minute. No issues. Yeah. So that's how you can have a div inside a div, and we can set elements to it as well, right? Now another thing that we are going to learn here is yeah, let's learn about hover. So what we have here is a heading h1, right? Now what we want to do is that whenever we move our cursor to this h1 heading, what we want its color to change, right? So what we can do here is we have given it an IDS, right? So what we can do is we can just use a hover, right? And what does this mean? That whenever we'll move our cursor on that element, what we want to happen is its color should change to, let's say, red. So when we refresh it, so you can see that whenever we are moving our cursor to it, its color is getting changed. Right. So this is how a hover works. We can use it with a div tag as well. Let's say div, we want a hover for div one. What we want its background color to change. That. Okay, so you can see the color getting changed to red. Right. So this is how a hover works. So these were a few CSS styling that we can use here. We can even style a table as well, right? We can even style a table as well, and we can add. See what we have added here is we have added a background color which is just black. What if we want to add an image in the background image? So what we have to do here is we have to write URL and we have an image with JPG, right? And we won't be needing this background color here. And we'll refresh it. So right now what we can see that the image is not properly visible, right? So we need some other attributes as well. For example, background repeat and background size as 100%. Now when we refresh it, we can see that our image has properly been set on the background, right? So I hope it is helpful to all of you here. Now another thing that we are going to learn here is about external css. So this is pretty messed up, so let's clear it all. And let's learn what and how this external css works. Okay, any doubt till now?
No, sir.
Good. Now we'll be looking at what an external css is and how does it work. External. Now we have a body tag. So let's add a few tags here so that we can apply our external css on there. Let's add a p tag here. Let's have a table here as well. Let's bring all of them in the center. We use a table here. Cell padding is 20 maybe. We have table rows here. Let's have 2 rows and 2 columns. That will be enough. TD is for table columns and TR is for table rows. Name and that's right. That's right. One. Okay. So then we'll refresh our page. What we are going to see here is something like this. We haven't written any heading here. So let's write heading. This is a paragraph. This So this is what we have here. Now what we can do here is, yeah, what we are going to do here is to add an external css. Now we saw just what an inline css and internal css are. Now what we want to do is, see, what in internal css we were doing is we were just specifying a style here, right? And we were just writing all the styles css scripts here. But what if we had two pages, right? Since we have two pages here, right, we have two pages here. So if you want to apply css to it, what we'll have to do then, we have to apply internal css to this page as well, right? We have to separately apply internal css to this page as well, and similarly we have to apply the same css to this page as well. So what if we had 10 pages? Okay, it will take some time, but we can apply that. What if we had 100 pages? What if we had 1,000 pages? So it will be really tough for us to apply this single block of code to all those 1,000 pages. So what we can do here is we can just create a CSS file. Okay, just let me create it. Yeah. So I just opened the folder where we have kept all the HTML files. So what we are going to add is we are going to add an external CSS here. So how do we add it? We'll just create a new file here, new text document, and let's name it as style. We can name it anything. Dot, its extension should be CSS. Yes. Right. Now we'll open this in the Notepad++ editor. It will Notepad++. Right. So now what we want here is that our heading, okay, that our first of all our body should have an image, background image. Let's set its URL as dt.jpg. Background image as URL this, then background repeat as no repeat, then background size as 100%. This is what we have added in our body. Now the heading that we want here is we want the size of our heading to be font size as 100 pixels. Now let's add its color as red. Let's add a text decoration as well. Text decoration as underline. We just want underline. And we need a paragraph text here as well. We just selected paragraph here, and we want size to be 50 px, let's say. Now we want its color to be blue, let's say. So that's it. Now let's refresh our page here. And we'll refresh it. We can see that this is our heading. Okay, so let's edit our table as well. Right, we can edit our table as well. the background color for table